So we are moving from the pelvis at our classes this week at yogaembodiedonline.com. And we have been talking about the movement of the pelvis, how it affects the spine, and how we move the spine, which is, the pelvis is part of the spine, the tailbone and the sacrum, how the thigh bone moves in the pelvis, and also how the pelvis and the rib cage connects through the psoas muscles as well, iliopsoas muscle, as well as the internal organs. So right now I want to go right down into the pelvis. This is a female pelvis, so I just want to just remind you that obviously the male anatomy is going to look slightly different. And this is a female pelvis form, so the male pelvis again, that anatomy looks slightly different. So if we finger, this is the hips, pubic symphysis, sitting bones, I'll show you the muscles from the bottom as well, sacrum, and the tailbone right underneath here. So we talked a little bit about the organs in the other video. We have the stomach, so the organ, that's the stomach, this organ. We have the liver, we have the kidneys, we have the intestines. As a muscle, we have the diaphragm, just underneath the lungs, that has a deep connection with the pelvic floor, so the pelvic diaphragm. But inside the pelvis, on top of here, we have the intestines. The intestines connecting to the rectum. So the rectum is in here. At the very front, we have the bladder. This is not a full bladder. The bladder can expand a lot. So that's right at the front for male and female anatomy. So for female anatomy, right in between, you have the vaginal canal, you have the uterus, you have the ligaments that moves towards the ovaries. So that will lie right in between, like that. So you can imagine these are just the pelvic organs, so you have the intestines, everything on top. So if there's a lot of pressure, like you collapsing, rounding the back, there will be pressure on your pelvic organs. If you are tucking the tailbone under, as we did in some of the videos, tucking under, the pelvic floor might tighten, and that's not a good thing. It might tighten and become quite weak. And so there can be too much pressure. It, along with other circumstances, maybe even create a prolapse and other issues. If we have that tightness at the pelvic floor, which I will show you here, so this is as if lying on the back. If we have the tightness of the pelvic floor, it has a connection to the respiratory diaphragm. We can't breathe the same way either. So these are the organs. We want the pelvic floor to be able to support our organs, as well as the organs I talked about before as well. The pelvis moves, so we talked a little bit about that. I'll take these organs out again, just then it's easier. We have the pubic symphysis, and we have the sacroiliac joints at the back. So there's movement in the pelvis. We don't want it to move too much. Obviously the thigh bone moving into the hip socket again is mobile. So there's movement, and you can feel that as we did before. We were having our hands underneath the sitting bones, whether you're sitting on a chair or on the floor. And you could actually feel, if you tuck the tailbone tucks in, the sitting bones move slightly together. If you stick your bum out, the tailbone lifts, your sitting bones move slightly apart. So there's actually quite a lot of movement. If you come into a squat, if you're sitting like this, the pelvic floor stretches slightly. If you're sitting like this, it's contracted. So we will move, just if we move our bodies with awareness, the pelvic floor exercises exactly as it should be. So we have that nice long back coming up to standing. The pelvic floor contracts slightly and it stretches. Contracts slightly, stretches. Just as it should do, just because our bodies are pretty incredible when we let them. So when we have natural movement, our bodies will really support itself. It wants to create equilibrium, it wants to be balanced. So if we have healthy habits, our body will support that. So because the pelvis, the structure of the pelvis moves, just as the bones and the joints can move, the muscles can either be tense and tight, so there's less movement, or there might not be a lot of support, and there might be too much movement or not enough support. So just a very brief anatomy lesson here of the female pelvis. So at the front, I sometimes talk about the diamond shape. So you can imagine this is a diamond shape of muscle, hammock of muscle, or dome of muscles perhaps. And the top one, the urogenital one, same name in male and female anatomy. We can think of here the perineum, the perineal body is here. So from sitting bone, perineal body, to sitting bone to pubic bone, is a urogenital triangle. And we have the genitals, and for female body, the clitoris and the urinary tract. And then at the anal triangle, we have the anus. So they are all different layers of the pelvis and the pelvic floor. So we usually say there are 3 layers of the pelvic floor. And we can stretch them, we can relax them, we can strengthen them. But like all muscles, you want flexibility and mobility. So it's not just about tightening the muscles, because what happens when we have tight muscles, it contracts this whole part and there's not a lot of potential movement in the pelvis. It will affect your spine, it will affect your rib cage, it will affect your digestion, it will affect how you breathe. So how our pelvic floor health is can affect how you're breathing. And again, in one of the other videos, we talk about the psoas muscle that moves from the spine, so at the end of the thoracic spine, all the way through the lumbar, all the way across down towards the head of the femur. You know, that will be affected as well. That's a part of our fight and flight, and how we contract, how we run away from something, how we fight something, how we can relax it to come into a state of self-regulation or self-soothing. So again, as we move through the practice, finding that balance of knowing when your structure naturally supports your pelvic floor, when you can release it, when you need a little bit more support to help the structure and your posture, and again when you can relax it. The pelvic floor is so connected to our fight and flight. I mean, it just have to, someone just to go boo, and you tighten the pelvic floor, you tighten up, and we have generally quite a lot of tension in the pelvic floor from that tightness, from being, I'm always saying this, but I probably shouldn't, but when someone talks about being very anal or uptight, it kind of connects to our anatomy. So just being aware of how we actually move and how our awareness actually is of the pelvic floor. Can we relax our pelvic floor? Can we tighten it? Tighten might be the wrong word. Engage it. Can you engage your pelvic floor? Can you relax it? Can you, both male and female anatomy, can you connect and relax different parts of the pelvic floor? Like the anal sphincter, the muscles here, the deeper muscles around the anal triangle, and the levator ani muscles are super strong, as they should be, So sometimes that's what we tighten, but we can't really control the muscles just near the perineum, or for women, the female anatomy, the vaginal muscles, or for men, the perineal or PG muscles, and the muscles around the urinary tract. So anyway, I could talk a lot about the pelvic floor, which I do in the Sacred Pelvis course, but this is just a bit of awareness for you as we move through our practice.